Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Team Emotional Intelligence 2.0. We will be getting started in a few minutes, and I'm so excited to be here with some members of the TalentSmart EQ team, with the authors of Team Emotional Intelligence 2.0, and also with contributors. So, hi.
Hi, it's great to be here.
It's great to have you. So as you're coming in, I'm noticing that many of you are already telling us in the chat where you're calling in from. So welcome in Greensboro, North Carolina, and Los Angeles. What I want to encourage you to do is to please use the drop-down menu to select all panelists and attendees. That way, as you share your valuable insights throughout the webinar, everyone will be able to see what you have to share. So use that drop-down menu, select everyone, and then you'll have the chance to engage with your colleagues throughout today's event. It looks like we have folks literally from across the country and around the world. We have some folks joining from Canada, from Colorado, from Georgia. I don't know where Rita Kirk is, but if you could tell me, I would love to know. We have Arizona, Arkansas, Delaware, Greenville, North Carolina, Las Vegas, Idaho, more in Canada. Welcome to so many Canadian callers today. If you by chance are representing an organization today, and this is part of your professional development, we would love to shout out your organization. So if you could take a moment to tell us which organization you're representing. Wow, we just have folks from everywhere. And welcome to the Memphis Dream Center. Welcome to Avista and Fusion for Energy and RDOT and Westgate Bank. Amazing. Guardian Ad Litem, Grover Gaming, CSS Pension Plan. Wow, it's just so many. So, and it looks like we have someone over in the UK. We have someone from Progressive, San Diego County Schools, Compassion International, California Coast Credit Union. Wow, just an amazing group of people who have joined us today. And I'm so glad that you are all here with us. We would encourage you, Tokyo even. We would encourage you throughout today's event to please continue to use the chat to engage with your colleagues, to share your questions, comments, and ideas. And toward the end of the call, we will have a Q&A and take some of the questions that you've been sharing. So thank you again for being here. We invite your engagement throughout the event. Before we get too much further, I want to tell you a little bit about the TalentSmart team that represents these authors and this book. Just a little bit of a commercial. TalentSmart EQ is the world's premier provider of emotional intelligence training and development, certification, assessments, and coaching. And their approach to emotional intelligence and leadership has served clients for almost 20 years to help them increase productivity and effectiveness in the workplace. Isn't it this year, Jean, that you're celebrating 20 years as an organization?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, 2020.
Amazing. And so if you're curious about who you're looking at on today's call, I'm going to briefly just name the folks on the call, and then we'll have some folks back with us at the end. So today we are thrilled to have the two authors of Team Emotional Intelligence 2.0, Dr. Jean Greaves and Evan Watkins. We also have two contributing authors who are part of the TalentSmart team, Josh Rosenthal and Dr. Sherry Duchok. So Josh and Sherry, thanks for being here. We're going to look forward to being with you at the end for the Q&A. And we're just going to have so much incredible learning together today. Thank you. So quickly, a little bit more about the two authors, the two lead authors on this book. Dr. Jean Greaves is an author, an executive coach, and an organizational psychologist, and she specializes in emotional intelligence in the workplace. So we have a leading expert in the world on this topic to share with us today. She also co-authored the Wall Street Journal bestseller, Emotional Intelligence 2.0, and has helped to develop a suite of other resources on these topics for TalentSmart. We also have Evan Watkins, who is a co-author on this book, and he has spent more than 7 years researching emotional intelligence and pouring into leadership development and training. And he served in a variety of roles, including creating content, analyzing research, and organizing and coordinating training. So Evan, it's great to have you. And Jean, it's amazing to be with you. We want to take a moment at the start of today's event to get to know a little bit about those of you who have joined us, and especially about your insights and knowledge on the topic of emotional intelligence. So we have a couple of quick polls that we would like to launch, and we hope that you'll share your feedback with us. So the first question is to Dr. Jean Greaves. first book on emotional Intelligence 2.0, that she co-authored with Dr. Travis Bradberry. Have you read that book? Yes or no? And these answers are coming in so fast. Any predictions here? Do we think that people have read this book? It's been read by millions. Isn't that right?
Yeah, over 2 million at this point.
Amazing. So I'm going to give a few more seconds on that. It is actually looking like the group is fairly split. So let me show you those results. We have about exactly a 50-50 split for those who've attended today. About half of you have read the book and about half of you have not. Let's take a look at our second poll. We are curious to hear about how familiar you are with the topic of emotional intelligence in general. So we have 3 possibilities for your response today. Is this a topic you've read a lot about? Is this a topic that you know something about? Or is this a term that you are not as familiar with? And we'll give you a moment to answer. I feel like I've been hearing about emotional intelligence for a long time, but I'm so excited to hear and learn more with you today, and then especially how you apply it to teams. All right, let's take a look at these results. It looks like, again, we have a split group. We have about half who have done a lot of reading on this topic, and only a small percentage of people who are not familiar with the term.
Okay, good to know.
Yes, well, let's dive in. And again, we do welcome any questions throughout the event, and we'll get to those toward the end. All right, so emotional intelligence, it's a skill that can be learned, and practice makes perfect. So as we get started, could you share your definition of what you mean when you say emotional intelligence?
Sure. I have an audience here that's quite familiar with the terms, so I'll stay real high level for those of you who are new to this. Emotions are just signals in your body trying to grab your attention and to inform you of something important. And when we say emotional intelligence, we're saying that there's a person out there who has the skill at being able to be aware, to understand those emotions, and to choose actions that are constructive, both for themselves and with others that they're interacting with. And being emotionally intelligent includes noticing and understanding the feelings of other people as you interact with them, and managing your relationships well over time so that your life is better and those around you's life are better. And EQ, if I can sum it up, is just being personally and socially skilled. And it's just not an inborn trait. It's something that you can develop.
Evan, do you want to add anything there?
No.
All right.
Yeah,
no kidding. Very practical. So, Jean, you and co-author Travis Bradberry have written the leading book on emotional intelligence, with Emotional Intelligence 2.0. So, now that we're looking at this new book, I'm wondering if you can share a little bit about the power of EQ as it relates to teams and the workplace.
Yes, well, I'm very happy to get the word out that emotions and relationships can either work in a team's favor or they can hold your team back. And every team member has feelings that surface throughout your workday and your work life. And you're either noticing them or trying to kind of push them away. And when they surface, a team can get very sophisticated about ensuring that they're creating the conditions and the interactions that they need to get your best performance and to have a work life that really is quite meaningful. So when a team handles their feelings in unskilled ways, the feelings themselves can harm their relationships and get in the way of optimal team performance. So I'd love to give a couple of examples. When you find out you weren't invited to a meeting, you're walking down the hall and you see people meeting, like, hey, why didn't I get invited to that? You can walk around for the next week or so feeling devalued. Or if you're in a meeting and you interrupt somebody else, they can feel shut down and kind of resent you for a while. Or when you get put on the spot and you're not feeling prepared to speak or present, you feel embarrassed because you don't want to look incompetent, and that can get in the way of your being able to choose your words really well. So both in the moment and over time, you and your teammates can get quite skilled with strategies that we provide in this book on how to deal with these moments when they happen. So my view is that the power of team EQ is lifting those individual emotional intelligence skills to the group level in a way where you don't always have to be your best self every moment of the day. This is not about perfection. It's really about how the team can build awareness, step in for one another, learn to shape the emotions that are occurring, how to intervene when they're starting to influence you in a way that makes no sense for the work at hand. And the group's ability to notice and understand and manage the group level emotions are really what's going to enable you guys to build strong bonds, both within the team and with people and other teams that are outside your group.
That's a really helpful explanation, and I'm interested to dig a little bit deeper. So could we talk a bit more about some of the benefits of team EQ and how raising the team's EQ can lead to high performance teams?
Yeah, I can take this one. I think maybe the single biggest benefit of team emotional intelligence is how it helps us tap into one of our greatest strengths as humans, our social brain. The social brain is the idea that the human brain is naturally wired for social connection, and that there's a lot to be gained by leaning into this tendency instead of away from it. So one example of how wired we are to be social is the idea of mirror neurons. And mirror neurons are specialty neurons that help our mind respond to the actions we observe other people doing. They also help us determine someone else's intentions and next actions. They help us sense subtle emotions in others as we watch, listen, feel, and interact. And they're also literally what enables us to watch someone dance and then mirror them. And they help us see someone feeling a certain emotion and feel that emotion for ourselves. So it's like kind of the foundation of empathy in many ways. The social subtleties that we pick up on because of our social brain are what make a team more than just a group of individuals working independently side by side. And they're what allow a group to tune into each other, support each other, and learn from each other as they work together. And so that's what the social brain is and how it helps us. But there's kind of a catch to the social brain, which is that even though social skills like these come naturally to us and act as a connection and collaboration multiplier, we still tend to undervalue their power and overvalue the power of the individual. And team emotional intelligence skills help teams move past that tendency to overvalue the individual and help them leverage the natural benefits of our social brain. So for example, team EQ skills help us see the benefits of collaboration. They help us collaborate more effectively, and they can even help us build a sense of community as a group. And so aside from the social brain, another way to look at how team emotional intelligence impacts team performance is to look at the existing body of academic research. And what we found looking at research studies from over the last 40 years was that practicing and improving your team's EQ can impact a number of performance areas important to your team's success. So these areas include innovation, problem solving, creating a climate of inclusion, trusting and listening to each other, aligning goals, empathizing with what your teammate has on their plate, handling stress, communicating and collaborating better, and even being more flexible and resilient.
Those are a lot of very, very powerful outcomes. And as I'm listening to you, I think what's sticking with me is a combination of what Jean said and what you said. So Jean, you said that when our team's emotional intelligence is higher, we don't have to always be perfect. And
Right.
Evan, you mentioned that, the problem that sometimes happens is that people focus so much on individual performance. But in some ways, it sounds like harnessing team EQ really takes the pressure off the individual, and everyone can perform better because we can compensate for one another. Am I on the right track?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like you're providing an additional asset to your team's toolkit.
Amazing. So let's expand on the 4 essential skills in the book and what each of these might entail as we start to see them come to life in our organizations. So the first one is this idea of emotional awareness or emotion awareness. Can we talk about that one?
Yeah, sure. I'll start off with, think of the 2 first skills as being all about emotions. So the first one is emotion, being aware of what they are when they happen within your group. So this is the building block for the other 3 skills, if you think about it that way. Emotion awareness within a team helps the group navigate their rhythms across situations. So whether they're interacting in person, over chat rooms, by email, by phone, even today as we are interacting remotely, awareness is being able to attend to the emotional habits and tendencies. So is your group over time investing awareness in what those tendencies do to either help you or hurt you? Is your group better able to grasp how the feelings that tend to surface in very common situations, how they're influencing your work together? So for example, does your group know which conditions are either making you feel much more motivated or getting you in a stuck moment where you just can't go past an impasse? Is your group aware of how do you operate when everyone is stressed versus when only one of you is stressed? Do you need music and periodic fun to get your best work and ideas out of each other? Or is your team a group that really just needs uninterrupted quiet and time? And do you even know this? And is your group mixed? If it's mixed, you're going to make different choices for how you set up the way you work together and when you convene and how you meet, the different kinds of times and things like that. Another example would be when your team feels comfortable observing each other's patterns around how you're expressing your feelings, right? So if you're comfortable with this topic of emotions, you won't look at the topic of feelings or how are you doing today, or did we just have a moment where we all were nervous, or why aren't we feeling confident today? Then these discussions don't make emotions feel like something that's uncontrollable or distracting or something that you just have to ignore. Instead, your team's going to develop a radar for what's getting in your way, and it's going to allow you to make choices for how to concentrate, when you can be creative, how to build trust with one another. Yeah, it's a really fun skill to get good at because you're observing and listening and talking over time. It's not something that comes immediately.
I'm curious how much talk about emotions comes in when teams raise their emotional intelligence, because in talking about awareness, there has to be some way, like how do I know how my team members are feeling? Can you say more about that, Jean, as it relates to emotion awareness?
Well, certainly at the beginning, every team was going to start to develop a vocabulary that works for them. Team emotional intelligence is not about having, I'll just use grandiose words. It's not a therapy sessions. You're not trying to do analysis on each other and all go around and do, to share anything that you're not comfortable sharing. But every team does have a way of getting to know one another, and the climate around you dictates whether it's okay to check in and say, how are you doing today? Or if you're noticing someone who's quiet, whether it's okay for you to stop by their office and check in with them. So if this term team emotional intelligence gets introduced, a team can begin saying, well, what I noticed is we tend to, get in the way, or you don't have to use like, this is the way I feel all the time. You can actually use the emotion adjectives. You say, I was getting distracted every time someone got up during the meeting. So if we can try not to do that, that helps me, finish out my thought. If I'm the one speaking. So when you hear me say examples like that, I'm not necessarily, only using feeling words.
That's really helpful. Well, let's look at the next skill. So once we have emotion awareness, then we need to manage emotions. So let's talk about emotion management. What does that skill look like on a team?
Okay, I'll take that one too, because I kind of like the idea that everyone listening today understands that the first two skills are about emotions, the second two are about relationships. So I'll take the first, two skill sets, and Evan, you can, take the next two. So emotion management is skill number 2. This is what the team does with their newfound emotion awareness. This is your words and actions, what you say or do, or what you don't say when it's important not to do or say anything, right? So if silence is as important of an action as something that you're seeing and hearing. So emotion management means getting ahead of the moments that could escalate and get in the way or to take over your group, as well as intervening once something has happened, because there's no way you can ever really manage and prevent all emotions, right? Emotions are, as I said, they're signals, they're material and data that your team should be working with. So emotion management is more nuanced than every team member handling their own emotions constructively. It really requires every team member to think and act about what's benefiting the team dynamic at the time that they're together. So this is what we call in the book a we mindset. You're building a radar for, say, a mood that's taking over the group. And when I mention moods are simply feelings that last for a period of time. They're about like a 20-minute to 30-minute up to several days. So if you're walking around thinking, our team is just in a funk lately, that's a good example of sort of a way to use the we mindset to have a different kind of conversation than you would if you were just trying to handle it yourself. So each team member will be doing what they can to make choices in the moment so you can perform at your best. So this is knowing when to keep quiet when you're not going to help the situation. It might mean when to speak up when you wouldn't normally. You can insert yourself, even however uncomfortable it is, because this stepping in and saying something is going to alter sort of the momentum that's carrying the group away. You're going to have the ability to support a teammate's comments when they're feeling isolated and on their own. You around the table might be thinking, oh my gosh, they are really a lone wolf out there. I kind of agree with them. And maybe in the past, you wouldn't normally say anything. But with this Team EQ skill set, you're going to say, I think that's an idea we should actually spend some time on. And it really might surprise the rest of the team, like, whoa, right? So you wouldn't normally speak up and you said it, so that must be important. Let's do that. So there are times where you're speaking on behalf of the group, you're taking action to stop things. Even how to challenge each other's ideas respectfully. That's, I think, one of the ones we hear so often in team surveys, that quietly a team member might feel disrespected. And if other teammates can learn how and why, they can take steps to ensure that doesn't happen over time. So overall, just think of team emotion management skills as knowing when to pull back, when to engage, and how, and together.
So we have a few clarifying questions that have come into the chat on this topic. And
Okay.
It looks like Camilla is asking if this idea of emotion management is a skill of handling emotional reactions, not really handling emotions. We'll try that one first.
It's definitely a big part of it, right? So emotion reactions are the behaviors that occur as a result. And if you're adjusting, right, the back and forth that occurs as reactions surface, it can help calm the room. So in a strange way, by focusing on the reactions, follow-on emotions become more constructive.
Okay, that's helpful. There's another question from Donna, and I want to let you know that I see it. I think we should save it until the end to really dig into dysfunctional teams. But I promised Donna that we'll get back to that question. It's a very good one. So let's continue on with those skills of emotional intelligence. And the third one is related to internal relationships. Can you share a bit more about how that skill is lived out in the workplace?
Sure. Yeah, I'll take the next two. Internal relationships and external relationships you can think of as related to each other, and the fact that they're both about how teams connect. Internal relationships is about how teams connect with each other, and then the external side is with other people and other teams. So, and of course, team emotion awareness and management also feed into the relationships and ability to connect. So the third team EQ skill is internal relationships. And this is what a team does over time to build and foster positive working relationships within the team. It's how your team works together on good days and bad and everything in between. And it can feel like a big ask because each team member naturally responds to challenges and situations in their own way. So to succeed, your team has to cultivate an effective team atmosphere and develop constructive work relationships among team members before those tough times even arrive. So it has sort of this like preventative component to it where you're building your relationships before the tough times come so that you're prepared to handle them in a healthy way. I think another thing worth mentioning about internal relationships is when we wrote this book, we looked through all of the comments on our team emotional intelligence assessment, and going through the comments from hundreds of teams, there was a trend in internal relationship skills where two problems arose very frequently. And the first problem is when team members talk about their frustrations about one teammate with one another, and then they start to feel worn down as they observe and listen to the negative relationships within the team. And the second is that teams struggle to find the right balance between productive work and feeling supported and respected as a person. So teams with strong internal relationship skills put time and effort into getting to know one another beyond just the tasks at hand. And they actually learn how to put positive feelings and moods to work and how to engage in healthy conflict.
Well, it can be difficult to balance that relationship building time with the focus on whatever work has to get done.
Definitely.
So talk a little bit about the external relationship side.
Sure. Yeah. So this is the fourth of the team EQ skills, external relationships. And this is all about how healthy relationships with people outside the team and with other teams offer additional avenues for a team to succeed. So with strong external relationships, teams can expand their sphere of influence. They can find solutions and resources beyond what they already have in their team. And then they can also lend helping hands to other teams to make a difference on an organizational level. Without external relationship skills, a team's hard work can go unrecognized, or a team can start to ruffle feathers and they could find themselves creating conflicts, unnecessary competition, or just generally a negative environment with other teams. And focusing on external relationships helps members of the group start to look up outside of their team and around the organization, which is really about like educating your own team about the world you operate in, but it's also about showing other teams the work that you do and how it impacts the organization. And it's about recognizing when to rely on yourselves and when to not, and when to rely on other teams or other people. And it's about taking responsibility, reaching out and problem solving together, and seizing opportunities as they arrive. Ultimately, this is the skill that connects teams throughout the organization. And as you pick up more and more teams who are high in team emotional intelligence, you're working on creating an emotionally intelligent organization.
That's really interesting to think about how it can go beyond a small team and the other teams within the organization. So I'm hoping we can get practical and talk about how these 4 skills can be implemented within organizations. Like, what are some strategies that you offer in the book or in your work that people can use to implement these ideas?
Yeah, okay, so this is such a fun part of the book. Just as in our first approach to working on your individual EQ, Team Emotional Intelligence 2.0 offers 50 plus strategies that teams can roll up their sleeves, zero in on which area they want to work on. And they come straight from the teams that are either excelling at Team EQ or those that have been making mistakes and had no problems telling us how and why. I saw that there was a question in there, is there an assessment with the book? There's not, because you need to coordinate with intact teams around responses and summary reports that's outside of individual book distribution. But we've had an assessment over the last 20 years, and a large part of our research was diving in deep on, okay, let's find the teams that are operating, at on 100-point scale, 90 or above, and those that are really struggling, right? And comb through what they're saying in comments, not any one specific team, but get themes that are sort of repeated over and over. Then for probably the last 15 years, our training team of real skilled facilitators, 2 of them being our contributors today, Josh and Sherry, they've been working with teams. So these strategies have come from all of that 20 years of work with teams. And we spell out by skill, okay, here are the ones that we know, because teams around the world across industries are telling us these are the ones that have really worked for us, or these are the ones we've struggled with most and we need some help with. So a few that would help with raising emotional awareness are things like really in advance, what are you doing to get to know one another at a deeper level? How are you checking in on each other at key moments? And how are you noticing and acknowledging the discomfort that surfaces when you work together? How are you learning to surface the quieter feelings and thoughts of valued team members that don't necessarily always take the stage? And is your group good at finding the source of the feelings that get in your way and what to do about sort of molding that source? What's making you all feel down and out for a period of time? We have a really great strategy on how to spot your team's triggers, not just your individual triggers, and then how you all treat each other when you're under stress. These are just examples that are more under emotional awareness, but I wanted to just sort of give you a taste. Then in strategies for managing emotions, things like in advance, there's quite a bit of great research out there in the field of team EQ, which there is one, right? There's a whole body of articles and research that have been going on since the middle of last century. And setting up healthy norms at the get-go for your team is really a key component. It helps reduce complexity or guesswork in social situations. And as team members join, they need to understand sort of the agreed upon rules of engagement within this particular team of people working together. Another is knowing how to find and spread positivity without it landing as unrealistic or Pollyannish. Positivity is a real tool. It's contagious, it spreads, it motivates momentum. Then you have the how to deal with challenges, like learning how to hear people out or how to speak up and say, I think we all need to take a break on this and come back to it at a better time. Another example is allowing your group to vent a little bit, release the pressure of some things that have been building, but knowing how to do it briefly and with purpose. Doing it in an unskilled way creates the complainer type of team. And there are some unique ones. For example, over time, if a team works long enough together, there may be a member that loses a family member, or a team may lose a team member. And we have a really specific, deep strategy on how to handle grief within a team. That's a really intense, strong emotion. And I don't think we need to be afraid to discuss that in a book. So hopefully there'll be some help there for teams that have struggled with that really difficult one.
That's encouraging to hear. I think especially for teams who have experienced 2 years of the pandemic, you know, talk about emotion awareness. There have been so many opportunities to tune into how people are doing as we've all faced these challenges together.
Yes. Yeah. So true.
Okay, so anything on these relationship skills, some practical strategies that people will find in the book?
Sure. Yeah. So I think going through internal relationships first, one of our biggest strategies is encouraging team bonding by spending quality time together without a work-related agenda. And we get into this really cool study in the book where a call center started having their teams have coffee together for 15 minutes every day. Then all of a sudden, all of their call stats started changing for the better. They got like lower average call time, more satisfied callers, and all of these stats. A second strategy is communicating clearly with one another. So taking into account how people's personalities differ within the team and how people therefore like to communicate differently. A third strategy is being open to feedback from each other, so you can learn from each other and start to create that atmosphere of openness and growth that make teams like special to work on. A fourth strategy is having tough conversations directly and not gossiping or speaking badly behind people's backs. And that was kind of that really common comment that we were getting on assessments that I was talking about earlier. And then a fifth strategy is working through conflicts. So not just task or work-oriented conflicts, but also relationship conflicts.
I did see a question in the chat where, oh, sorry about that. The question in the chat was wondering about addressing the issue of conflict, and we can circle back to that a bit later.
Okay, yeah. And so for external relationships, I'll go through 4 key strategies. So one is understanding the broader environment by taking a close look at how your team's work fits in with other people, teams, clients, customers, and just the greater organization in general. Number 2 is leveraging team members' relationships with key players or key teams. And so that's about actually drawing on individuals within your team who have key relationships with other people in the organization to build out your team's network. And third is deepening bonds with other teams to avoid becoming siloed and to tap into intersections between your work and ideas with those other teams. And then finally, we have framing requests to the greater company mission in order to win resources, buy-in, and support. And that's where you're really starting to win resources and attention by connecting the work your team does with the mission and values of your organization.
That seems like a really powerful tool. Thank you so much for that. So there's so many questions coming in, and we're hoping that we'll be able to get to them. But before we switch to the Q&A and have Josh and Sherry rejoin, I'd love for us to talk for a moment about what an organization can do if they want to increase their team's emotional intelligence. So you've shared a lot of practical strategies, but what's another way that, you know, if there's someone listening today and they're confused about how to even get started on this team EQ journey?
Okay, sure. Yes. I have a couple of suggestions that start at a team member level and then can rise up to an organizational level. So let's just start with the individual. Let's just say your team has no idea about this topic. You came across the book, you kind of were curious about the title. We wrote this book in mind that a team player can simply begin showing up and putting into their life practice some of these strategies, and it'll already do some good. Now, if you want to invite your team as let's do this together, then yeah, by all means, we have it would be perfect for a book group discussion within your team. We have book group discussion questions in the back. Chapter 4 outlines a really clear process for how to get started. And we suggest that you pick one of the 4 skills and then pick just up to about 3 strategies for that skill to practice for a period of about 3 months, and then build into your team agendas a quick check-in, like how are we doing with the strategies that we chose to practice. Now, because remember, some things like let's stop interrupting each other, that could be one, right? You could practice that 8 or 10 times over the course of a week, but there might be another one that won't surface more often than about once or twice every quarter. So depending on what you're attempting to do, the length of time you need to practice that skill will vary. For teams that really want to do a deep dive, TalentSmart has had this training program around Team EQ for years, sort of a half-day retreat. Those possibilities are always there, and I think that to begin with, an organization can get started by really getting familiar with the potential that these strategies offer. If you think that there's 4 skills, think there's 4 quarters in a calendar year, right? You could, work through the seasons of Team EQ over the course of time, but even then, you're really only doing 3 of maybe 15 strategies for each skill. So you could map this out. And what makes that so perfect is this is a journey, right? To develop new habits and patterns. You want to be doing this on an ongoing, make it a natural part of how you do business together, rather than making this a sprint to the finish. So we just encourage you to introduce yourself to the topics, begin conversations as you can, and really together make it sort of more of an open discussion. The more you keep it out, the more emotions get to take control. And we want to give that control back to you and have you become masters of your own team destinies.
Well, what a powerful idea to take each of these skills in a quarter and focus on them in your organization or on your team. That is really powerful. So now we want to invite back Josh and Sherry. And Jean, if you could just take a quick moment to share about your colleagues and their contribution to the book.
Oh, yeah, certainly. Well, I'm so pleased to have both Josh and Sherry here. Dr. Sherry Dutchuk is a keynote speaker. For years, she's been a consultant and expert around communications and emotional intelligence. And both Josh and Sherry, we consider them our road warriors to be out working with teams and individuals. So often when we do EQ work, they're actually spending 1, 2, 3 days at a time with intact teams. And there's just no way you can't not have conversations about what happens when this happens in a group. So we asked them to join us as contributors, and they, many of the strategies in our book were drafted and polished and written by them. We've had conversations over the years about what to do in specific tricky situations. So pleased to have Sherry on the team. Josh, similarly, well, I'll say, Sherry's background has been in this topic area and just brings a wealth of ideas centered around the emotional intelligence skills and strategies. And Josh comes to us with a sociology background. Go figure, right? So think of him as sort of having that meta view with us having an individual view. We've had so many important life philosophical discussions, and he also has been facilitating our team program with intact teams and contributing ideas. Back maybe about 5 years ago, we all sat around a table and came up with our own ideas of strategies and put them into work, but it wasn't until we went back and tested them on the data. So I look at Josh and I think, yeah, he was there generating all those strategies. So you're really talking to someone who has lived and breathed this topic.
Amazing. What a a powerhouse panel, and we have lots of questions that have come in. We will do our best to get to as many as we can. I want to go back to the question that I referenced earlier from Donna, and she's wondering how this applies to intact teams that have a long history of dysfunction. So it all sounds great, but do you have a case study of how these ideas can be applied when there's a history of just difficult relationships or dysfunction?
You know, one thing I'll mention is this is sort of a key piece. A team that's had dysfunction really should not look at it as like, we're going to go handle this in a session, right? And sometimes jumping right into the negativity gives it voice and power. There may be an opportunity to step back and reset how this team begins. And both, let me just open this up to Josh and Sherry. You may have seen this at times happen in a moment, and we just want to learn from you.
Yeah, I actually worked with a highly dysfunctional team, and the program that we ran was more of a reset. It wasn't going to solve all the problems, as Jean said, in one session. But what we had to do was we had to get down to people really voicing what had led to the dysfunction, not by pointing fingers, but by getting clarity on what their needs were. So for example, we would start talking about norms and trying to develop a plan. And someone might say something as simple as, we need to treat all of us, we need to treat each other with respect. So then my job was to say, what does respect look like for you? Because even just the word respect can be interpreted very different ways on a team. So when we started to get specifics about what it looked like for each person, then they could establish some norms around respect and figure out how they were going to, as Jean loves to say, gently remind each other when these moments arose about what the norms they had established and how they were going to move forward. So there is a bit of having to not dwell on the negativity, but use it as a stepping stone to see what's been missing, what has then led to the dysfunction, but then get very practical about, okay, what is it going to look like going forward? And so we definitely have seen that. And we're resetting the ground rules and saying, okay, here's the session, let's reset ground rules. Now you will refine these ground rules as you go forward, and then start seeing that gradual shift into a more highly functioning team.
That is a super helpful story. And I think hopefully was helpful to the person who asked the question, helpful to me to think about, like, these skills aren't necessarily going to solve an organization's dysfunction overnight, but a reset can be helpful in terms of charting a healthier path forward. So I do have a question here from Rosa, who is a mediator and has to deal with a lot of different parties and emotions, including her own. And she's wondering if there are some techniques to use in mediation. Like, is there a way to apply team emotional intelligence in that setting?
Oh, yes, certainly. In fact, we've had some mediation organizations do some work with us. So it's nice to have you here listening to this. A mediator can prepare themselves before the sessions, right? Being very present and being able to kind of, as we say, individually clear away the clutter. Now think about a mediator with different parties. Now you're talking almost about two teams with a guide. And I think mediators don't have the luxury of being able to kind of educate the parties ahead of time about this topic called team emotional intelligence. But you may be able to infuse some guidance just by how you name what's happening in the moment, right? So if someone's not responding to what the initial party is expecting, a mediator can do something along the lines of, I know it's really quiet and it's okay that we're taking extra time to think that through. That doesn't mean that there's hesitancy around this idea. So let's give this the quiet and the time that it, in a way. So it's almost like you're a narrator that's priming the minds and the ears of those people that are either ready to pounce or ready to feel like, oh, this is not going well. So it's a nuanced skill, and it places a lot of responsibility on the mediator, but I think it's an important role that can help diffuse things to kind of add and escalate. All of these questions could be such fun full day discussions. I'm so sorry for the short nature. Evan, you had a thought on that one?
Yeah, I'll just tack on kind of a fun, quirky study that we have in our epilogue that I think relates to this, which is there was, they had a study where there was an actual robot on a team. And when they started to engage in a conflict, the robot was programmed to kind of call out when people crossed a line and to help mediate the conflict. And if you can imagine like how a robot was able to help mediate a conflict, I mean, if you bring in an actual trained human to mediate, you can see how it can make a really big difference.
That is such a memorable story, Evan. Thank you. All right. So I have a question related to whether the ideas of the team EQ book could be incorporated into a team charter and guiding principles. Have any of you seen that brought together?
Josh, I'd love to hear from your work with teams.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. And we do see this in a number of different varieties. One of the things that we've heard time and again, even today, is the value of team norms. And that is ways that we agree on a team that we want to interact. And we've all agreed, by the way, that these interactions will help us be most effective. And what I've found in working with teams, and I think Sherry has as well, is a lot of times when teams come together and agree on what these norms are, they make their way into these types of documents, into these types of ideas. That way, when new members come aboard, they can really be brought up to speed and they can add their unique contributions. So for example, if we're going to say, hey, you know what? A new team norm is going to be don't reply all if you're only talking to one person, because it fills up everybody's inbox and nobody knows whether to come in and tackle this problem. We're a little bit at a log jam and then nobody does anything. And I actually was working with one team who got really excited about this team norm. As simple and as silly and as everyday as it might be about replying all, and they included it in their team norms conversations. In other words, regularly teams meet. However, it's infrequent that we actually have an opportunity to talk about how do we want to engage. So that's just one example of many where teams need to get on the same page about how we want to engage, and also, just to emphasize something Sherry said a moment ago, how we want to hold ourselves accountable in a very productive way. And so these conversations do make their ways into certain team documents, certain team charters, even organizational values we've seen. So it is important to include as many people as possible in this work and to make it as public as possible, meaning we're going to have our team norms and we're going to post them. And we're all going to see unequivocally how we want to operate.
Yeah, and I don't even think teams need to consider once that's on the wall, it can never be touched again.
Right.
As teams, different members join, it can be revisited and updated, periodically. Yeah.
Sorry about that.
No worries. I think about, when you think about your house, right? Just where you live, there's certain things you do to maintain it over the course of a year. Sometimes you dig in and clean out the closets, and sometimes you're going to do sort of regular weekly maintenance. Okay, now think about your team. This topic is kind of meta work, right? You are all there together to be producing something or creating or work together, but what are you doing to work on how you work together? And are you being disciplined about that or not? And so we don't want you to have to spend the time running around figuring out which things will help. We went and figured that out. We put them all in this book. So now just really sort of comb through those 4 that'll really make a difference and get on with the practicing, because that's what takes the time.
Thank you for that, Jean. So I have a really powerful question. I think we only have time for this one more from Camilla, who says, some people in my team, even though they are outstanding performers, are overly ambitious. Do you have any advice on dealing with narcissists? There's a tough one. Let's wrap up the hour with a really tough question.
Wow, yes. Okay, so the thing about team EQ is the goal will not to be we're going to figure out how to change another person. You're looking for avenues to maximize what you can do together and to minimize maybe the harm that any one individual can have. So you just went right to one of what they call the dark triad, right? A narcissist is one of those triads. So you're not going to change them, but team members can balance, right? Knowing when to step in and give an alternative viewpoint, or if one or two team members have such strength about saying we must go, 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 and it's all about me or all about achieving this, to the extent of your health and whatever the case may be, it might be time for the balance not to be just one individual. It may require 4 or 5 to say, we need a break and we have the same goal that you have. And if our energy is depleted because of the way it's been decided to do the work, we're not going to achieve the goal anyway. So it's almost like figuring out your best strategy, like really being strategic about how to achieve the same goal together. At the end of the day, you may have to drive home or walk back to the kitchen if you're working remotely and say, did I say and do what I could have today to have the most impact? And I'll try again tomorrow. You have to live in a real world. You might not win every small battle. Any other thoughts from Sherry or Josh or Evan on that one?
Yeah, real quick, I couldn't agree more. I think this is a tricky thing. And I love that this is the last question today, because it really points to a solution, not the only, but can be to turn to these team EQ skills. Because when we talk about the two things that really impact a team's work and a functionality is how we feel and how we connect. Well, if one individual or multiple individuals for a variety of reasons are compromising those things, we got to get back to the basics and talk about what emotions are surfacing that get in our way. How do we manage them? How are internal relationships looking, and how do we interact with external stakeholders? And throughout that whole process, we are bringing folks back into the fold, or we are giving voice to quieter folks. So when we talk of narcissism, sometimes that does compromise others' willingness or ability to step in, because somebody else might be really the leader, whether they are or not, because of their personality is much stronger than others. So now we turn to a strategy such as maybe surface the quieter feelings. So, and that's just one of many examples of how narcissism may surface, and a number of different practical strategies that we as a team can do to start to neutralize maybe that distraction. And then finally, I just want to share, for anybody that might be getting in the way of a team's work, just think about having each other's backs. In these discussions, it's never easy and never straightforward to address a team member on what you consider to be their narcissism. That's a really tough conversation. It's a tough thing to do. But just think of it as their contribution is just as important as anybody else's. All the relationships matter on the team, and all the emotions matter on the team, including that individual. So before I toss it to my colleagues, who I'm sure have a lot of interesting things to share, try to stay away from finger pointing. It'll only exacerbate problems.
The one thing that I will just add to that real quickly is, and I'm seeing some people even say it in the chat, is I think it's really important that we shy away from labeling in general. I think sometimes we tend to throw around terms like a narcissist or these things, and we're not diagnosing here. We're trying to get the best out of everybody, and oftentimes the labels themselves can create some more distraction than really getting at solutions. So that's just the one thing that I would.
Well, and you just carved out the perfect suggestion, which is calling out the small behaviors diffuses the power of them, they become more doable to fix, right? The words and actions that had the effect. Yeah. There it is.
Yeah, thank you so much for these amazingly powerful insights. And for those of you who are interested in learning more, today is the perfect opportunity to pre-order this book for yourself and for your team. And we've been putting the links throughout today's event into the chat. I also noticed some people talking about the Emotional Intelligence 2.0 book, which is also available now in a new edition. So today would also be a great chance to pick up the latest edition of Emotional Intelligence 2.0 for those of you who have not read that book yet. We would also encourage you to visit the TalentSmart website at talentsmarteq.com. And we have coming up another chance to talk with the authors, with the contributors, and to join in community face-to-face on a Zoom meeting. That's coming up on May 9th at noon. And I'll be thrilled to host again with this group. And we would love to have you sign up and join us for that virtual launch celebration, which is coming up in a few weeks. So please take a look at all those notes in the chat. We will be sending out a follow-up email with all the links and with the recording of today's event. But what we'd like to do now is to wrap up the hour with some concluding remarks from Dr. Jean Greaves and from Evan Watkins.
Yeah, so my best to every team out there. I think you're going to find variety and things that fit your team within this book. Venture forward with the idea in mind that perfection is not your goal, and that discussing this will feel easier as you get started, and that you're there for one another, not to call each other out, but to point out the successes, right? When you get together, say what went well when we were practicing it. And all these mistakes can potentially begin to fall by the wayside because you're not giving them so much attention. So be kind to yourselves. Know that you'll fall back into old habits. That's normal when you're learning a new skill, and that is not the moment to quit. Just keep on keeping on. How about you, Evan? Do you have well-wishing thoughts that could be helpful?
Sure. I think my final thought is that I always try to fall back on the strategies themselves. So if you have a question or a challenge and you're trying to figure out where to go next, I would look through like the actual strategies and see which one speaks to you in that way.
Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom today. Have a great day, everyone.